Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our fourth Zoom session on the coronavirus management in Germany and the EU, a fourth talk in a series that has been initiated by the German Embassy and the EU delegation in Tel Aviv. The goal is to explore and to learn about the challenges, realities, and strengths and weaknesses in the wake of this pandemic. And today we are going to dive in to one of the most interesting aspects and perhaps the only one that brings some hope to people's eyes these days, people's eyes and hearts and minds. And that is the vaccine and the process of developing a vaccine. And we are very lucky to be joined by Professor Ulrike Protzer, who is a MD and a professor of virology at the Technical University of Munich. She will soon tell us more about herself. At large, she has been working in the past few years on the virus-host interaction of the hepatitis B virus, and her research is aimed at advancing understanding of the molecular and immunological mechanisms of virus control. And I do apologize in advance if I get mixed up with some of the ways that I pronounce these complicated medical terms. So, hello, Professor Protzer. Hello, Ulrike. How are you? Happy to have you with us.
Hi, Tal. Thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm really happy to discuss with you.
So we always start with an identical question, which is me asking you for a short elevator pitch. If I would meet you on the elevator and we were stuck for 3 minutes, what would you, and I would ask you, who are you? What would you be telling me? And what have you been doing in the past few months during the pandemic? And what is your main insight from COVID-19 so far?
Yeah, so basically I studied medicine, and then I first had a training quite intensive for 7 years in internal medicine, focusing on infectious diseases. And after then going into a research period, I decided to switch more into microbiology and virology, and that's where I am. And where I finally got an offer for the chair of virology here at the Technical University, heading the institute at the Technical University, but also at the Helmholtz Center in Munich. And I'm working on the virus-host interaction already for, I don't know, more than 20 years for different viruses, but our main focus just in the last years was the hepatitis B virus, until I must say the coronavirus crisis started, and we had the first cases here in Munich, actually in the Munich area, with somebody coming in from China, bringing in the virus, and we were involved in managing these first cases, and that brought us very much into everything about COVID-19. And then obviously also the problems in Europe came more from the southern part, so Italy, Austria, and right into Munich. So again, we were the first ones to be confronted in the first wave we experienced here in Munich. And as we already had worked with coronavirus some 7-8 years ago, we were just ready to go and started our research and started our diagnostics and everything we needed to also work with our university hospital here and with the public on the virus.
How, this is a novice question, but how different, I mean, how unique or how spectacular is spectacular on the wrong from the wrong side of from the wrong meaning, but how unique is the coronavirus compared to other viruses that you have been researching in the past few years? What's its speciality? What's so amazing about it?
Well, first of all, it's a completely new virus. So none of our immune system has ever seen that virus or anything very similar before. So everybody is lacking any sort of immunity. So everybody is susceptible. That is the first thing. The second thing, which is unique, is that it's a virus which is highly infectious, but only for a relatively short time period. And that's because it replicates in our nose and throat area. That's where and it replicates to really high titers there But then when the immune system kicks in, the virus titers go down and you're not that infectious anymore. But the period at the beginning of the infection where you often don't really notice that, either you have no symptoms or maybe a little bit of a headache or just a little bit tired, you already have huge amounts of virus, and you can of course spread that and hand that on to others. And that's the big problem of this pandemic.
So now the question is, so when we're talking about a vaccine to this kind of virus, first of all, what exactly is a vaccine? Biologically, what are you looking for, and what is so unique about the COVID-19 vaccine? Because people are describing it in, in terms of historic breakthrough in immunology and vaccine development.
Yeah, so a vaccine is basically something which mimics an infection without causing the consequences of the infection, so without making us ill. And it pretends to our immune system that there is something where the immune system has to react to. So what usually happens after 4 or 5 days after an infection, you already do before you are confronted with that very pathogen. And then your immune system has seen in this case, the SARS coronavirus 2 already, or it thinks it has already seen it. And as you are then really exposed, it immediately reacts and within minutes or hours eliminates everything in your body. So the virus doesn't have a chance to really infect you, enter your body, and cause any illness. That's the principle of a vaccine. And that means you have to very specifically activate the immune system for the parts of the virus. So because the immune system looks at the virus from the outside, yeah, so it sees the virus from the outside, it sees the proteins which are around, and that's what you have to make your immune system alert to. And that's basically what we want to do with a vaccine. Now, why were people a little skeptic about a vaccine? It's not that easy to create vaccines for new pathogens on the one hand, but also creating vaccines for pathogens which come via your respiratory tract is not that easy. There's other viruses where people already tried for years and were not that successful. But in that case, and that's something maybe where we are lucky here, it seems not to be very hard to induce protective immunity. You can induce what we call antibodies. That's basically also proteins which your immune system uses to just capture the virus. Yeah, these antibodies are all in your body, and if there's a virus coming in, they just capture it, and then you have cells and they eat it up. So it's like an eat me signal for the immune system. And this is how the virus is removed from the circulation. And inducing these types of antibodies does not to be so complicated against SARS coronavirus. And that's why the vaccines which were designed now also really seem to have very, very good efficiency, better than we expected actually.
So which vaccines are currently being developed in Germany as we speak? What type of vaccines?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at vaccines, there's a lot of different types which you can use. You can basically use such a virus and just then inactivate it, make it dead, and use it as a vaccine. And actually people in China have done that, and that in China is used as a vaccine, but this has not been regulatorily really proven, so that will not be used in Europe or in the US or in Israel, I guess. Other means would be, and that's complicated because growing the virus is complicated and you cannot do that in large scale so that you have it for everybody. Other means would be to isolate proteins or produce with biotechnological means the proteins which are on the outside of the virus, which are seen by the immune system. And that is something which is done. There is no vaccine available yet, but that is what companies follow. Companies like, for example, GSK or other big ones. And then there is new ways of inducing immunity. And two of these new ways are, first of all, using a viral vector, so another virus. But this virus then pretends it's a SARS coronavirus. And the virus which is mostly used here is an adenovirus. So basically you have to think it's from the outside, it's still something like an adenovirus, but in there, it encodes for the surface proteins of the coronavirus. So the immune system thinks, oh, there is an adenovirus plus a coronavirus coming. I have to be really careful and react against both of them. And this type of vaccine is, for example, the Sputnik vaccine, which the Russians have developed, but also quite a lot of others coming out of England, coming out of different countries. Italy have these types of vaccines, and also Israel is developing these types of vaccines.
But the big hope that has been, all the spotlight has been on the Pfizer vaccine, right? And the Moderna vaccine.
That's where I wanted to come to at the end, because that's basically the last option you have, is that you use the mediator of producing proteins in a cell, and that's RNA. That's the type of genetic information every cell of our body uses to tell the cell, okay, you have to produce a protein. So very natural thing. And the good thing here is that since like 4 or 5 years, we can produce that biotechnologically, and you can really do that in large scale. And it's also very, very safe, because every cell in the body has tons of RNA inside. So it's nothing which is not known to the cell or so. And this can be used then to within the cell produce the surface proteins of the SARS coronavirus. And then again, the immune system thinks, oh, there's the real virus, I have to react. But it's not, it's just the RNA, which is gone after, I don't know, 2-3 days, because it's not very stable. But the immune response remains, which this induced. And then if the real virus comes, then again, the immune system can right away, the antibodies can bind, the T cells can kick in and eliminate the virus. And so that's why it is protective.
So basically, each type of vaccine tries to cheat the body, the immune system, into believing that it sees corona or some kind or corona protein, right? And each vaccine has a different way of cheating the immune system. Is that?
Yeah, that's a very good way to describe it. That's a very good way to describe it. And the cheating can be done by different ways. The important thing is this way does not have any, the way how you cheat does not have any side effects, but it is secure and does not harm the body. And that's, I think, that's what is shown in these large phase 3 trials. And that's where Pfizer or BioNTech, the German company, now had their announcement that in the 40, I think it's almost 50, more than 50,000 volunteers where they used their vaccines, that was quite safe. And it was very effective. It could prevent 95% of the infections, which is really good. No influenza vaccine comes there. They're all lower. So that's a very good result. And also the Moderna one, which is the American one, they're very, very similar and has the same result.
So yeah, you said phase 3. So can you go through like what are the phases at large in vaccine development? And you got to be very, very brave to be, I don't know, to volunteer, to be, one has to be very, very brave to volunteer and be part of these experiments, right? So maybe that's how I feel. I have a friend who is currently participating in the trial experiment here in Israel, and I believe she's a brave person. I just wanted, what risk is it for the people who take part in these experiments and all of the phases of the vaccine development?
So in vaccine development in particular, because you're not going into somebody who has a disease like for a drug, you're going into somebody who's healthy. So the safety precautions you have to take are very, very high. You first of all have to test what you have in a lot of animal models and see, do they react in any negative way? do they react in a positive way? So do they respond with an immune response, which you want to have? That has to be the answer, yes. But then you have to exclude that it has any types of side effects, toxicity, or whatever. And if you've proven that, then you start with very small trials. That's then phase 1. That's like, well, 20, 30 healthy volunteers who receive that type of that vaccine you want to develop. And then you very carefully, again, look, is there any side effects? And you also play around with the dose. So which dose is the one you really need to have some sort of immune response, and always looking for safety. And that's then the phase 2, which is a few hundred. And then in the large, only if that is inducing immunity as you want, and there is no sign for any side effects, only then you are allowed to start the larger phase 3 trials. And these larger phase 3 trials with several 10,000s of volunteers are then are only started when you know the thing is safe, but they mainly look at then whether it's effective. And to show that a vaccine is effective, you have to go into a situation where there's infections. Otherwise, you cannot show the effect. And that's why they went into particularly areas where there is a lot of infections going on, because you need a certain number of infections to happen to say, okay, that happens in the control group, what we call the mock group, which did not receive the real vaccine. But it does not happen in the group where the patients or where the volunteers receive the real vaccine. And if you have that difference, then you can say, okay, the vaccine is efficacious, and that's what we think the percentage of efficacy is. And that's how it's done.
And how much of this process is, a private process by the pharmacological companies, and how much of it is it state organized and directed by, the federal government? How much involvement? I mean, is it up to the medicine companies and to the pharma medicines? It's up to them to decide if they want to, what kind of vaccine they want to develop, how much is it combined with, the national needs or the area needs or whatever, the real needs?
Yeah, so basically it's the decision of the company which type of a vaccine they want to produce. And usually they would always produce those types of vaccine where they have the know-how. Otherwise, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But then they need money to do that. It's a very costly process. It really costs several millions and a lot of millions. And they will not have the money just out of their pocket. So what you then have to do, you have to approach governments, you have to approach private investors or institutional investors. And by that, there is a quality check. Because, if I would give $1 million to a company, I would very carefully check whether what they are doing has a good rationale, whether it has a future, whether it really makes sense. And that type of control is put in on the money side. But then, of course, there's also a lot of control from regulatory officials in the different states. So each small step you do in this development process, starting from producing your vaccine component over what I told you about these preclinical animal studies for toxicology up to phase 1, every step is really highly regulated, and you have to document every tiny bit of what you do and what happens, and everything goes to the regulatory authorities for approval. And only if you have your approval, you're allowed to proceed and go forward. That's why normally these processes take a lot of time. Yeah, now you can ask why it's faster here. And the trick why it's faster is basically 2 things. One thing is that people put a lot more money in than you usually put into a development process. And that allowed companies to already, if you do your first phase one with just a few people, you need only very little of your vaccine. But if you then do your phase 3, you need a lot. You have to produce a lot. So what they did is they said, okay, we'll take the risk, and we already put in the money to produce a large batch to allow us to do a phase 3, not knowing whether they would ever be able to do that, would be allowed to do that. So the regulators could have stopped them anywhere in between. And then the money would have been put down the drain because the produced vaccine and also the production facility would not be used anymore. And that's again where the investors, of course, check a lot. And the second thing is that when you do your large phase 3 trial, where you then need like your 40, 50,000 volunteers, if you only do that in 1 or 2 places, it takes very long. But if you do that in 150 places in parallel, then it's much, much faster. And that's how they try to speed up, to just engage a lot of study centers in parallel.
Mm-hmm. And how far away is Germany, you know, from finalizing an approval process for for the vaccine? I mean, after phase 3, when they say now, you know, 95% success, 90% success. So what does that mean? I mean, how far away is the final approval and to start using these vaccines?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, because the 95% is a press announce from the company. It's not an official announcement of the regulatory authorities. So now the company has to hand in every detail of their study, and the regulatories will have to approve that. And only then they can finally say, okay, everything is correct. That's really 95%, and everything has been correctly done. And that process takes time because it's just large studies with a lot of people participating. They had a process where they did not wait until the end and then only handed in, but like had a rolling process every like 2,000 or 4,000 volunteers. They already handed in that part of the documents to allow the regulators to start checking that. That speeds it up a little bit, but still definitely the regulatory approval will take time. And once the study is completely finished, and I think that's about to finish now, it will at least take 6 weeks to 2 months to have everything checked and controlled and get the regulatory approval. And I think that's good because they need the time to make sure that everything is correct, all the data is correct, all the safety data and efficacy data are correct. So I think it's good. And then you can start marketing the vaccine.
And you need to start producing it in a very massive mass production, right? No, so when would you expect, based on this timetable, let's say nothing dramatic happens in the way, when would you expect a vaccine to be available for the German population? By March, April 2020? Is that the current expectation?
I think the first vaccinees will receive the vaccine probably around March 2020. I mean, the shares of these companies went up very much. They got a lot of money now from the stock market, so they can already start producing the vaccine with the money they have without selling anything. Mm-hmm. Still waiting for the official approval, and I guess that's what they will do. But until we have everything, I guess it will be March when we can start vaccinating, and then that's an effort. I mean, in Germany we have 80 million inhabitants, and about 30% of those are risk patients at risk.
But isn't it enough? Isn't it like just to start rehabilitating like the economy and to try to get, you know, the industries and economies on track? Wouldn't it be enough to give distribute the vaccine like to risk population? Or do you need to have a mass, like everyone needs to get vaccinated before you can get back on track? Or is it enough to have just like a portion, the most sensitive portion of society take the vaccine first?
That depends what you want to have. Definitely, you first want to protect those at risk, because that already allows you to sort of get going again, at least maybe not completely to normality, but at least get the economy and everything going again. But looking at the German population, as we have a rather old population, the persons at risk make up 20 to 30%, so around 20 million. And vaccinating 20 million is not something you do in 2 days.
Yeah.
That takes
Yeah.
time, that requires a lot of infrastructure, a lot of logistics. And it's also elderly persons who cannot simply go to the doctor and get vaccinated or to the vaccination center. I think vaccine teams have to go to visit them. And that's an additional complication that is there. So it will take quite a while until at least those at risk have been vaccinated.
And do you think that from now on, like, how does it, from now on, will everyone in the world have to take a coronavirus vaccine, like, for the next few years? I mean, is this going to be like one of a must-have vaccines that someone gets at birth? Is this going to be the procedure eventually?
I don't think so. I think it will rather be like the influenza vaccine. But that's a guess. Yeah, I don't know whether that becomes true, but I think the coronavirus will finally turn into a second influenza virus, which comes every winter and goes away over summer. And then you could again handle the whole thing like the influenza vaccine. And you also will have a certain part of the population who has been infected and has built up natural immunity. So definitely you do not have to vaccinate everybody, but you have to vaccinate like 20, 30% of your population every year at least, if not more. And that's still a lot.
Yeah. And there's always a question, or at some point comes up a question of, I guess, fair distribution, right? And justice in distribution. How about, I don't know, will the vaccine cost money in Germany, for instance? Will it be state sponsored? And what will be, the priority? Who will be defining the priorities of who's in risk and who needs to get, the vaccine first? Because at some point everyone can find, something to define them to get the vaccine, and will want to get the vaccine so they can get back to life, right?
Yeah, or maybe are allowed to see their grandparents again, or these very simple things. That's not 100% clear yet. There is a paper by the National Ethics Committee together with the National Vaccine Committee and an academy, and they think that we should first go for the risk groups, which means the elderly, those who have pre-existing diseases, even if they are younger, and those who are in medical service, because they have high exposure and you don't want them to drop out. Those will be the first groups. And once we have vaccinated those, then I think the vaccine will become step by step available to those who say, no, I really need that because I have to care for my elderly grandmother, or at least I want to see them again now. I want to step back into normal life, and then by that process we will define. I'm not sure whether the state will be able and willing to pay for everything, but the influenza vaccine usually also in Germany is paid for by the state, at least for those who are at risk, and I guess that's the same they will do for the coronavirus vaccine.
Do you feel like, in a way, that the vaccine is, well, are there too many expectations from the vaccine? Are people making their hopes too high? Like perhaps, treating the vaccine and every news about the vaccine development, is a break of historic news that will change their life. And perhaps we will be disappointed and we will see that there is a vaccine, but still the virus is going to really hurt our life and damage, our normal way of living.
Yeah, I think one has to be a little careful and should not have too high expectations. It will definitely help to handle the virus and to live with the virus, but we will still have to live with the virus. It will make it easier, but it will not take the virus away and bring everything back to normal within like a year or something. That will not happen.
And for yourself, this is our final question for a personal question as a scientist and someone who, researches viruses. Is this really a historic health epidemic event? I mean, do you treat this in a way? Do you see yourself as lucky as someone who could be evident to this research and to the breakthrough and to the everything surrounding the pandemic?
I'm very happy that the vaccine seems to work in a way as we hoped it would work. Whether it's a historic step, I mean, history will tell us. That's very hard to say right now, but I think it definitely has the potential to be a very, very important step, and also showing that everybody in science and also politics can work so closely together and have a worldwide effort to push something forward, which is really needed by a lot of different countries. I think that was, for me, a very important and really a historic step. Now, the second question, or the big question, next question will be, will we also be as good in distributing the vaccines throughout the world? Will the wealthy nations be able and willing to help those who do not have that much money but still need the support? That will be the next big question, which we have to tackle.
And you said that this is this was a quick process of developing the vaccine, relatively quick. One would ask, there are other viruses that people have been dealing with for ages and haven't been treated so quickly. And so is it really a matter, that could also be a question, maybe it's a matter of where these viruses hurt and,
yes,
who they hurt. Let's stay on an optimistic note and hope that this cooperation between politics and science will overcome some of the bad things of our world. Thank you very much, Professor Ulrike Protzer. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's hope that hope together that there will be a vaccine for Israel, Germany, and all around the world. Join us again next week for our next talk. And Ulrike, would you like to say something else? Last thing, famous last words.
No, thanks very much for having me here. And I think it's very important to stay optimistic. We will have to live with this virus, but we will also be able to adapt and be able to live with it. We'll find a way.
Amen. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.